I'm Kara Mitchell, 28, the black sheep of my wealthy Boston family. While my siblings collected Ivy League degrees and parental praise, I secretly built a healthcare tech company from nothing. Tonight was our annual family dinner, the dreaded gathering where my life choices would be dissected and dismissed. I never imagined my phone would ring at the perfect moment, transforming years of belittlement into shocked silence. Sometimes life's sweetest victories come when you've stopped seeking approval. Before I tell you how my family tried to cut me off right before learning I was worth millions, let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe. You'll want to see what happens when success becomes the ultimate revenge. Growing up in Brooklyn, Massachusetts, in a sprawling colonial home with manicured gardens, I was surrounded by success and expectations. The Mitchell name carried weight in Boston's financial circles thanks to my father Thomas, a stern, calculating investment banker who measured worth in dollars and prestigious connections. His career at Goldman Sachs spanned 3 decades, and his portfolio was as impressive as his inability to show affection. My mother, Eleanor, was the perfect complement to him, a Wellesley graduate who traded career ambitions for charity galas and country club memberships. Her social calendar was her religion, and appearances meant everything. When introducing her children to Boston society, she'd beam with pride over my siblings while finding subtle ways to minimize my existence. Then there was James, my older brother by 4 years, the golden child, the heir apparent. By 30, he was already a vice president at my father's firm with the right connections, the right haircut, and the right fiancée from the right family. His Harvard MBA hung in my father's study, not his own apartment, as if his achievement belonged to our father. Perhaps it did. Madison, 2 years younger than me, was the family princess. She had my mother's charm and my father's cunning, a combination that made her the perfect political spouse in training while she completed her law degree at Harvard. Her blonde hair was always styled, her smile always perfect, her achievements always celebrated with dinner parties and announcements in the Boston Globe Society pages. And then there was me, Kara, the middle child, the question mark. From an early age, I was different. While Madison played with dolls and James counted his allowance, I was disassembling computers and putting them back together. By 12, I taught myself basic coding through online tutorials, spending hours in my room, creating simple programs while my parents worried about my antisocial tendencies. Computers are for boys who can't play sports. My father once said when he found me coding at 2 a.m. on a school night. And it's certainly no career for a Mitchell woman. My mother's concern was more about appearances. Darling, your posture will suffer and those screens will ruin your complexion. How will you find a suitable husband? High school was no better. I attended Phillips Academy where I excelled in math, physics, and computer science. My parents attended exactly one science fair when James needed a ride to a lacrosse game at a neighboring school. My robotics team won nationals, but my parents were in Aspen that weekend. Madison's debate tournament wins warranted family dinners. At Mistral. My perfect SAT math score earned a distracted "that's nice, dear." When college applications came around, my parents had my future mapped out. Wharton undergraduate, then Harvard Business School, followed by a suitable position at a consulting firm until marriage. I applied to MIT instead. Engineering. My father laughed when I told them my plans. That's not a Mitchell field. That's for the people who work for people like us. I still remember my mother's horrified expression. But all your friends are going to Princeton and Yale. Who will you meet at? MIT. Despite their protests, I went to MIT with a partial scholarship. They could have paid my full tuition easily, but my father called it learning financial responsibility. I worked part-time jobs throughout college while maintaining a 4.0 GPA. My graduation ceremony was attended by Aunt Patricia, my father's sister, and the only family member who ever encouraged my interests. My parents and siblings were in Martha's Vineyard that weekend for Madison's engagement party. My first job after college was at a healthcare startup in Cambridge, making $65,000 a year, a pittance compared to James's six-figure starting salary. At family gatherings, this became ammunition. Kara is still finding herself. My mother would explain to friends as if I were backpacking through Europe instead of working 60-hour weeks learning the industry. All that education for a secretary's salary. My father would joke at Thanksgiving. Madison was particularly skilled at the backhanded compliment. It's so brave how you don't care about. For years, I endured these comments while observing, learning, and planning. The startup world was teaching me things my family would never understand. That failure was valuable, that hierarchies could be disrupted, that money was just one form of currency, and most importantly, that I had ideas worth pursuing, whether the Mitchell family approved or not. 2 years ago, while working at the Cambridge startup, I noticed something that changed everything. Patients with chronic conditions were struggling to get timely specialist consultations, often waiting months for appointments while their conditions worsened. Meanwhile, specialist schedules had inefficiencies that could be solved with the right technology. The healthcare system was operating like it was still 1995 while patients were suffering. The idea for secure health came to me during a 3 a.m. coding session in my tiny Somerville apartment. A HIPAA-compliant platform that could securely connect patients with specialists remotely using AI to optimize scheduling and matching based on symptoms, urgency, and availability. It would include secure video conferencing, medical record sharing, and prescription management Align One platform. I withdrew $50,000 from my savings. Every penny I'd managed to squirrel away while paying Boston rent and student loans. It was enough to build a prototype and create a business plan. For 6 months, I worked my day job and built Secure Health at night, surviving on coffee and determination. The first major challenge came when seeking initial investment. Male investors would listen politely, then ask if I had a technical co-founder, meaning a man. Healthcare is complicated. One told me condescendingly, as if I hadn't spent years researching the field. Another suggested I find a seasoned CEO and take a CTO position instead. You're clearly bright, he said. But investors need confidence. I pitched to 37 potential investors before finding one who saw the potential. Jessica Barnes, a former healthcare executive turned angel investor, gave me $200,000 in seed funding, enough to quit my job and hire 3 people, a back-end developer, a UI/UX designer, and Alicia Thompson. Alicia was initially hired as an administrative assistant, but she quickly became much more. With a background in healthcare administration and a fierce work ethic that matched my own, she understood my vision immediately. This isn't just software, she said during her interview. This is going to change lives. Within months, she was effectively my COO, though we couldn't afford fancy titles yet. Our first office was a converted storage room in a Cambridge co-working space. We worked 7 days a week, often past midnight. When the air conditioning broke during a July heat wave, we coated in our underwear with bags of frozen peas as cooling packs. When we couldn't afford furniture, we sat on cushions and used cardboard boxes as desks. The breakthrough came 9 months in when Massachusetts General Hospital agreed to pilot Secure Health in their neurology department. Their patient satisfaction scores increased by 42%, wait times decreased by 68%, and specialist utilization improved by 33%. We had data now, real impressive numbers that told our story better than I ever could. More hospitals signed on. Revenues started flowing. We moved to a real office in Kendall Square and expanded to 15 employees. Series of funding came through $4.5 million that allowed us to scale nationally. Then Series B a year later, $28 million at a $65 million valuation. Through it all, I told my family nothing. After years of dismissal, I'd stopped sharing my professional life with them. They thought I still worked at the original startup, perhaps with a modest promotion. I invented a fake one-bedroom apartment when they asked about my living situation, though I'd actually purchased a loft in South Boston. I drove my old Honda Civic to family gatherings, leaving my new Tesla in the garage. This secrecy wasn't just about surprising them eventually, it was self-P protection. I couldn't bear their dismissal of this thing I was pouring my soul into, and as success came, I realized I wanted to prove something, not just to them, but to myself. That I could do this without their connections, their money, their approval. In the weeks before that fateful family dinner, Secure Health had been preparing for its initial public offering. Goldman Sachs, ironically my father's employer, was leading our IPO with early valuation discussions centering around $100 million. We had expanded to 112 employees across 3 offices with contracts at 2,130 hospitals nationwide. The Wall Street Journal had profiled me as one of 30 under 30 changing healthcare, though I'd managed to keep the article from my family's attention. The night before the dinner, Alicia and I had been on calls with international investors until 2:00 a.m. Major news was brewing. Japanese investment firm SoftBank was considering a significant pre-IPO position that would potentially push our valuation even higher. As I selected a deliberately modest outfit for the family dinner, a simple, black dress from Banana Republic rather than the Chanel I could now afford, I wondered if tonight might finally be the night to reveal my secret success. Little did I know, my family had plans of their own. The Mitchell family estate in Brooklyn looked the same as always, imposing and immaculate. The colonial-style mansion, with its white columns and manicured hedges, was featured in Architectural Digest the year I turned 16, the same year I won the State Mathematics Olympiad, an achievement that went unmentioned at dinner that night. I parked my old Honda at the end of the circular driveway behind James's Porsche Cayenne and Madison's Range Rover. Taking a deep breath, I checked that my phone was on vibrate. Alicia knew not to call unless it was truly urgent and prepared myself for the annual performance of being the family disappointment. The heavy front door opened before I could knock, revealing Margot, my parents' housekeeper of 20 years. "Miss Kara," she said with a genuine smile, the first I'd receive all evening. "It's so good to see you." "You too, Margot," I replied, handing her the bottle of wine. I'd brought a $30 Cabernet rather than the $300 bottles now in my own collection. "Is everyone here already?" "Yes, in the solarium for drinks. Your brother is sharing news about his promotion." Of course he was. I smoothed my dress, plastered on a smile, and headed toward the familiar sound of crystal glasses, clinking, and polite laughter. The solarium, a grand room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the garden, was my mother's, pride and joy. Tonight it was filled with the usual suspects. My father holding court by the fireplace, my mother arranging canopies with surgical precision, James gesturing animatedly while Madison nodded with practiced interest. The surprise addition was Aunt Patricia, my father's sister and secret ally, who rarely attended these gatherings due to her bohemian lifestyle. She was a literature professor who wore colorful scarves and had divorced twice. "Kara, you finally made it," my mother announced, making it sound as if I were hours late rather than precisely on time. Eleanor Mitchell, at 58, looked a decade younger thanks to discreet cosmetic procedures and a religious skincare regimen. Her blonde bob was perfectly styled, her navy dress likely purchased that week from Neiman Marcus. "Hello, Mother," I said, accepting her air kiss. The traffic from Cambridge was terrible. "You really should consider moving closer to the family," she replied, a conversation opener she'd been deploying for years. "There are lovely apartments in Back Bay that would be much more convenient." Before I could respond, my father's booming voice interrupted. "There she is, the computer whiz." Thomas Mitchell's condescension was always wrapped in jovial packaging. He raised his tumbler of scotch in my direction, but didn't move to embrace me. "Hi, Dad," I said, crossing to kiss his cheek. Still at that little startup? He asked, though he knew perfectly well where I supposedly worked. It was his way of establishing that my career wasn't worth remembering the details of. Something like that? I replied vaguely. James swooped in next, reeking of expensive cologne and privilege. At 32, he was my father's mini-me down to the Rolex, and the slightly too firm handshake. Baby sister, just telling everyone about my new division. 14 people reporting to me now, and a corner office with a view of the harbor. He took a dramatic sip of his martini. But hey, I'm sure clicking buttons or whatever you do is rewarding too. Madison completed the welcome gauntlet, looking like she'd stepped out of AJ. Crew catalog in a pink sheath dress and pearls. Her Yale-educated fiancé, Brian, was thankfully absent tonight. His supercilious explanations of basic concepts made James seem humble by comparison. "Kara, you look comfortable," she said, eyeing my simple dress. "Very appropriate for someone in your position." The only genuine greeting came from Aunt Patricia, who crossed the room to give me a warm hug. At 63, Patricia Mitchell was everything my father was not. Warm, curious, and blissfully unconcerned with social hierarchies. Her academic career studying feminist literature had made her the family's black sheep long before I claimed the title. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, the urge to reveal everything, battling with years of protective secrecy. This was the moment I'd both dreaded and anticipated for years. Actually, I began carefully. The healthcare app I've been working on is doing well. We've expanded to several hospitals. And that's nice, dear, my mother interrupted, clearly finding the topic uninteresting. James, tell everyone about the new summer house you're looking at in Nantucket. And just like that, I was dismissed again. James launched into a detailed description of waterfront properties while I pushed duck around my plate, wondering why I still allowed these dynamics to hurt me after all these years. Aunt Patricia caught my eye across the table and gave me a small, encouraging smile. She alone seemed to sense that I was holding something back. Little did any of them know the real drama of the evening was yet to begin. As Margot cleared the main course dishes, my father cleared his throat. The Mitchell signal for an important announcement. The table fell silent immediately. Even Madison paused her monologue about wedding flowers. "Your mother and I have been doing some estate planning." He began swirling the remaining scotch in his glass. With James's career advancement and Madison's upcoming nuptials, it seemed an appropriate time to revisit the family's financial arrangements. My mother nodded with rehearsed solemnity. This clearly wasn't a spontaneous discussion. "As you know, the Mitchell name carries certain expectations," my father continued. "We've always emphasized making choices that honor the family legacy and contribute to its continued prosperity." I felt a familiar knot form in my stomach. Whenever my father spoke about family legacy, it was inevitably followed by criticism of my life choices. "James will be taking over as the trustee of the family's main investment portfolio next year," he announced, nodding proudly at my brother. "And following Madison's wedding, we'll be gifting her and Brian the Cape Cod property to give them a proper start." "It's the logical choice," Madison added unnecessarily. "Brian's political aspirations will benefit from a family home with historical significance." My father turned to me then, his expression shifting from pride to something more clinical. "Which brings us to you, Kara." I sat straighter, feeling the air in the room change. Aunt Patricia's hand found mine under the table and squeezed gently. "Your mother and I have given this considerable thought," he continued. "And while we've supported your unconventional choices for some time, we've come to a decision." My mother set down her wine glass with deliberate precision. "We're cutting you off completely," she announced, as if commenting on the weather. "Effective immediately." The Yasi words hung in the air. Though I hadn't relied on family money since college, the finality of the statement and the public way it was delivered felt like a slap. The annual allowance, any future inheritance considerations, access to the family vacation properties, all of it, my father elaborated, until you demonstrate more appropriate choices befitting a Mitchell. Appropriate choices, I repeated, finding my voice. You mean abandoning my career for something you approve of? Don't be dramatic, Kara, Madison interjected. They just want what's best for you. You're wasting your potential at that little tech job. James nodded in agreement. The family has a reputation to maintain. Your choices reflect on all of us. I looked around the table, taking in their expressions. My father's stern disapproval, my mother's practiced concern, Madison's poorly concealed satisfaction, and James's paternalistic disappointment. Only Aunt Patricia looked genuinely distressed on my behalf. What exactly do you expect me to do? I asked, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. Quit my job? Go back to business school? Marry someone from your approved list? Don't take that tone, my mother warned. We're trying to help you course correct before it's too late. 30 is approaching quickly, and you have nothing substantial to show for yourself. The irony of her statement might have made me laugh if it weren't so painful. You've had ample time to establish yourself, my father added. Yet you insist on this. Healthcare software gimmick that's going nowhere. It's time for adult decisions. Kara, the Mitchell Trust is meant to support family members who contribute to the family standing. James explained as if I were a child. Your computer hobby doesn't qualify. It's not a hobby, I said quietly. It's a company. My company. A company? Madison scoffed. Please, you work for a startup that will probably fold next year like most of them do. You've always had creative tendencies, my mother said dismissively. But real businesses require business acumen, dear. Something you've actively rejected by avoiding proper business education. My father leaned forward. This isn't a punishment, Kara. It's motivation. Sometimes people need to face consequences before they make better choices. The condescension was so thick I could barely breathe. For years, I'd hidden my success partly out of self-pity protection and partly waiting for the perfect moment. I hadn't expected it to arrive like this, served alongside dessert at a family dinner. So, let me understand, I said slowly. You're cutting me off financially because my career doesn't impress you enough. We're reallocating family resources toward ventures with proven returns, my father replied. The investment banker and him overtaking the parent. James and Madison have demonstrated sound judgment and proper ambition, while you, my mother added, have demonstrated neither. Just as I opened my mouth to respond, my phone began to vibrate in my purse. I ignored it, focusing on the conversation. You've never once asked about what I actually do, I said. Not in any meaningful way. You decided, years ago, that my work wasn't valuable because it didn't fit your narrow definition of success. My phone buzzed again and again. Multiple calls in succession. Alicia's emergency signal. That's not true. My mother protested weakly. We've always supported your independence. Supported? I repeated incredulously. You've belittled my choices at every turn. You didn't even attend my college graduation. MIT isn't Harvard. Madison muttered as if that explained everything. My phone continued its insistent vibration for calls now. Perhaps you should answer that, and Patricia suggested quietly. It seems urgent. I hesitated, then reached for my purse as my father sighed, dramatically at the breach of dinner etiquette. I set my phone aside without responding and instead called Alicia. I'm so sorry, she said immediately. I had no idea you were at a family dinner. I should have been more discreet. Don't apologize, I interrupted. Your timing was actually perfect. Really? She sounded relieved. So, they took the news. Well, they took it exactly as I expected, I replied. Suddenly, my computer hobby is fascinating, and I'm being added to guest lists I've never qualified for before. Ouch, Alicia said sympathetically. What are you going to do? Focus on what matters, I said decisively. We have an IPO to prepare for, hospital systems to support, and actual lives to improve. Family politics can wait. Speaking of which, Alicia transitioned to business mode. The team wants to celebrate the SoftBank news. Breakfast meeting at 8 Yao. Perfect. I agreed. Oh, and Alicia, order the good champagne. The team deserves it. After hanging up, I walked to my window and gazed out at the Boston skyline. For years, I'd lived in two worlds. The struggling daughter at family dinners and the successful in boardrooms. Now those worlds had collided, and I needed to establish how they would coexist going forward. The next morning, I arrived at Secure Health's Kendall Square offices to find the team already gathered in our glass-walled conference room. 35 faces looked up expectantly: developers, designers, health care specialists, and administrative staff who had believed in the vision when few others did. Before we pop the champagne, I said, setting down my bag, I want to thank each of you. What we've built isn't just valuable in market terms, it's valuable because it matters. Every day, patients connect with specialists who can help them because of what we've created together. Alicia handed me a flute of champagne and raised her own. To Secure Health, she toasted. And to Kara, who saw what healthcare could be when everyone else was stuck on what it was. After the celebration, I retreated to my office to find a delivery waiting.